Sorry, let me jot this down before you get back.
Okay,
Zoom in.
welcome everyone back to our work meeting. We are now down to item 3 on our work meeting agenda, which is our budget reports. We'll start with 3.1, which is the fiscal year 2021-2022 budget review. We just went through the approval of the tentative budget. And now would be, I think, appropriate time for some discussion on that. So, Jared, go for it.
Because I said I have questions. So I'm hoping for some clarification. So there's a couple times Alan has said, you have questions. And I was coming into the meeting hoping to get answers from previous questions. So I've tried to make a list here, but I'm a little bit confused. Because we were given this, we're all called in 1 by 1, 2 by 2 in January. So for my notes, this was January 27th. So we've got major problems with the budget we need you to be aware of. And got this sheet, which looks to be consistent with this that was delivered a couple of weeks ago. Right, so I guess what my confusion is, if we've got those major problems that were outlined, and maybe you can go back to this and outline what those issues were, and then where they're being addressed, because see that we've really addressed it, so I guess the question is, are you looking for us to give some ideas
I
to solve
think
those?
it's been addressed and that was presented, but here's the deal, okay? When I met with you a month and a half ago to talk about the problem was not that we didn't have enough budget. The problem was you were planning a $40 million fiber optic and a public safety and a public works, and we needed all these roads and so forth, and a fire station and whatever. My point in that meeting was telling you, we got enough budget to operate on, but you can't do the things you're saying you wanna do. Okay? Now, as we went through this budget, you'll see that what I gave you a couple months ago was showing that our average that we come out on our general fund at the end of each year is $1.8 million. We worked on this one with the managers and we actually are coming out with 3.4. Okay? We talked to the managers about the same thing that we talked to you about that we needed to do better at.
Sorry to stop you, but maybe that's where I'm confused if I'm not looking in the right place, because I'm not seeing the 3.4 for we're talking about general fund balance, right? What I'm seeing in this, I'm sorry, the pages aren't.
You're talking 3.4 proposed at the end of the next fiscal year, correct?
Okay.
Cause this is
If
saying.
you look in the last section of the general fund, you'll see that we're transferring $3.326,000 to capital projects. That's the money I'm talking about, okay? Everything we have left from general fund is going to capital projects. You can look across that line and see how little we've been able to transfer over the past few years, okay? We're making an adjustment there to come up with the answers to the things that I talked to you guys about. Okay?
So those are great answers, but I'm not seeing it on here.
Okay, I think you're looking in the summaries category.
So what I'm confused at is these numbers, right? Cause this is the end.
1.6, yeah.
Yeah. Right?
Okay, but
Where we're only at
I had the same question.
6.4% fund balance versus 23.
okay. You see right there, that's what we're transferring to capital projects. Okay, now, we do have a small fund balance this year because of the fire. We've gotta transfer money right now to cover fire that won't be covered till the fall. We've talked all along, that would be fund balance, well, that's gonna hit us right now,
Okay.
okay?
What's that amount?
Well, I'm calculating that we need to send
That's basically a loan until
2.4
January.
till November. But we have to have money in that
Right.
fund on June 30th for the audit, okay? So we're gonna go down in fund balance this year, but it pops way back up next year. So, you know, but, yeah, I think we've tried to address, what was it now, if we have other areas that we want to address, then we need to know what your opinion
Alan,
is.
of that 3 nearly 4 of next year, and working with the managers through that process, how much of that increase from this year to next year is through maybe a little bit of growth and increase in taxes and that, and how much is potentially attributed to, I guess, working with the managers and doing some of those cost saving
Well, I guess
actions?
this is what I would say, is that it's mostly due to growth, but in the past, our growth has been replaced by adding money to our operations. We've added people,
Right.
costs to operations. Well, this year, as we went through with our managers, we added one person, as I remember, in our general fund.
In the general fund.
And that was a facilities person. So, as we met with the managers, they all told us, we can do without people this year. So we're seeing the growth coming this year, but we're not growing the costs because we've agreed not to this year.
So our managers are saying we can continue to do the same even with the growth with our current.
This budget anticipates one full-time person in general fund, 5 in police, and 5 in water. Okay? So water is proposing 2 full-time, water tech ones that will be the whole year, another 2 that they would hire at the halfway point, and then they are proposing a water conservation officer, which is part of the water conservation plan that you guys approved, so that's what we have. Then in the police, there's a supervisor, there's 2 officers, there's a mental health person, and a parking enforcement person. So that, but what's happened this year has happened in that we are getting our natural growth in revenue, but we've held back on the natural growth in expenditures.
Thank you. If I could, really quick, Chief, obviously being well aware of the mental health issue on all fronts, can you just talk a little bit about what the plan is for that body in terms of in your office of how it will, I guess, fit into that need? Is it to address the internal need or the external need or both?
Well, originally we had thought both, but as we learned more about it and as I talked to the larger agencies that employ this in groups of 10 and 20, literally healthcare professionals, it's 2 different things. And we're learning that across the board that one wouldn't necessarily fit the other. There is, however, grant opportunities available for interior mental health folks, which is just as important, right? To keep law enforcement healthy. That we will be proposing a coordinated effort with South Jordan and Riverton, perhaps July frame. But again, those are funds that are becoming available by the federal government. Little known about it right now, other than they just released the documents for it, but it's moving quickly. And I think you'll see that number grow throughout the nation, that the dollar number, right, grow as the feds start to put money towards the mental health of law enforcement. So when you talk about internally, these large agencies that I indicated earlier with their mental health programs, they have caseworkers and mental health professionals together, right? Salt Lake City, for instance, has 5 of each. Big department, right? 400,000 people or whatever they're servicing there. Ours would be on a much smaller scale, but we certainly need to address it. You guys get to see the 2-week case review. It's a problem, right? We're experiencing it in domestic violence. We're experiencing it just on the streets every day. We're experiencing it, and the officers. It's very time consuming. We're hoping to use it as a force multiplier as well. And like I talked about before, these are flashpoint calls, right? Anytime you go on mental health flashpoint call, it can go south really quickly. Our idea is that we have a circuit breaker in that. Now, we recognize that we probably will not ever get to a point where we're not going on these calls initially. And fire too, right? That's just not gonna happen. They call the police, we go. What we hope to do is not have that follow-up, that secondary, collision with law that become more and more volatile. We want to get those people into resources that we manage. Now, we also know that we can't control it if we don't own it. And by that I mean MCOT was not funded last year by the legislature. We wait hours and hours and hours for an MCOT person to come, if they do. We're left with the only option, which is to leave. Because the de-escalation of that moment is to not be there. So we're leaving somebody in crisis. So we're hoping to get these resources that we manage, that we control in place to.
Are you looking to hire somebody that already has a certain skill set, or
Yes.
is it somebody that you will be training?
But we would hire them with that skill set, because it's all very new to all of us right now, right? And quite frankly, we would probably be one of the very few small police departments that would have this ability.
Chief, would it be fair to, I've heard it categorized that, and you've expressed this to me in some frank discussions, that the police really don't want to be the ones to show up when it's a mental health issue. You're kind of not qualified to be involved in that, right? But it falls to you because there aren't any other resources.
And usually at 2 a.m, no one else answers the phone, right?
Exactly.
So,
On the other hand, the idea that you would deploy just a MTSW or something like that to a potentially dangerous or violent situation seems absurd as well, right? To expect them to go out on their own. Do you anticipate these being joint efforts, that when there's a flashpoint call, that both uniformed police and this person would both show up,
yes, in fact,
ideally?
we probably, with the size we are and the limited resources we have in the mental health field, probably the officers would go and call that person to the scene or call that person out. So we see that happening. And again, these are calls, like we discussed, that law enforcement and fire go on together, and we all sit around and scratch our heads about how we're gonna handle this problem. And again, we are in the business right now of leaving. If that's what de-escalates it, we will leave. But at the end of the day, this bright idea that social workers were gonna take over this role and go to all these calls just isn't, it's never gonna happen. Because the social workers themselves tell us, yeah, we're not gonna go up to that door. No, that's not happening, right?
Right.
But we do need to keep law enforcement in a certain lane with that type of call, because we do look for violence and is somebody breaking the law. Because somebody's having a bad day, all of a sudden these fully uniformed police officers show up at the door, that isn't helpful either, right? So we need to get to a point where we can start to address these issues before we become the default social workers, which our officers right now are really, really acting as your everyday social worker on the street. And certainly, I wouldn't say we're not qualified to go and help de-escalate a situation, because we've taken very specific training more recently in that regard. And you learn it on the streets every day, but it's really not in our role to be doing that. And we really just don't fit well with it. And fire has struggled with it as well. Both of your public safety arms show up to it, and you kind of sit around and think, what do we do? What are we gonna do? And in the event we do have to take somebody to the hospital, they show up in a police car in handcuffs, which is not good. Where all of a sudden that person who's in crisis is on center stage, getting out of a cop car in handcuffs. So none of it is good. And like I've told you before, we are at a crisis point in America with mental health.
Yeah.
And if you don't believe it, come ride with us for a day, because it is real.
And I know this conversation goes a little afield of budget, but I do think it is germane in the fact that it's this type of analysis and consideration and discussion that goes into behind every single, person that's on this that we're adding. There's reasons and considerations and needs that are associated with these hirings that we're making,
If I may, let me add this. I could ignore the problem and hire more and more cops, because that's what we've done in America. That's what we think is gonna, let's just hire more cops then. If we're going to more mental health calls, let's just hire more cops and create more of a problem. Instead, it was our belief that instead of hiring that, let's look at a different way of handling it and help get the officers. There are other problems going on while we're on mental health calls. There are problems.
can open this
We'll have
one.
it, yeah, we can open this door.
He's done.
Okay.
And we'll play
He's
music.
done.
Yeah,
He's done.
okay.
Just keep,
Shutting one door and opening
Yeah,
the other.
things like that.
and we all have to move at the same time.
So yes, to answer your problem, what we're trying to do is get the right people in the right lanes, under the right systems to help our community. And it isn't, I don't believe that it's my job to just say, let's keep hiring more cops. I need to hire people that are specific for the problems we're encountering. And one of them is parking services, right? We have fully uniformed officers driving around talking to people about their cars being parked halfway across the sidewalk. It can be addressed much easier, much more appropriately, and for much less money if we get somebody in that lane that can handle it at a different level, right? So those are the kind of the things we thought about when we put together who do we need. And then again, as we talked about in our annual review, the reality is we are gonna have to have more officers. And you're gonna see that number incline with the population. And that's okay, right? It's a growing city. But we definitely need to hire the right people to do the right job. And we are one of the few small police departments that have this ability. If the only, I think. So a lot of the other police departments decided not to do it and hired more cops. So
Thanks, Chief.
I think it's a good way to handle it.
Appreciate that.
So the only question I have on the police budget, and I'll jump back over to this, to the other, make sure I understand. Is from day one, at least for me, said that the whole idea, and at least we should be seeing it here with, we see the revenue coming in that we're keeping here, right? And helping our community rather than paying it into the snow globe and getting a couple flakes at the other end. But it's, the police department it should be self-sustaining. We shouldn't be subsidizing them with general fund, et cetera. There's one part in there, $400,000 or so, that says it's transferred to public safety, but that's for animal services.
Animal services and emergency services, they are doing both of those now. The emergency services is it's been in general fund forever, and that's for public emergencies, floods, fires, whatever.
We have,
Emergency management.
we have an extension of Salt Lake County Emergency Management via UFA and then managing the Salt Lake
Right.
County Emergency Management.
So,
So we have that direct access, but locally, city level, PD is taking care of that function within the city.
yeah, that,
Cause the goal ultimately is that especially keeping that money here, I mean, the budget of what's the project for next year, almost, 7 to 8 million. I mean, we were given, at the time, we were giving it all to them and getting $2 million worth of services. But we also wanna make sure that in the end game, we're not gonna have to subsidize the police in the end, so we wanna make sure that they're paying for all of their stuff. We wanna use our economies of scale if we can, right, for maintenance of vehicles and those sorts of things, but the replacement of vehicles and equipment and everything, that's all in the police budget. Yes?
yes,
And we are receiving impact fees now that we didn't, as you'll recall, under the previous provider. Those monies are going into a fund to hopefully help.
Impact things, right, for
And-
6 years to.
And along those lines, Jared, I would just say, I think it's appropriate on the emergency management side of things that as our city continues to grow, our needs internally in that position specifically will continue to grow. And we should be looking ahead and planning for the time where our city probably needs a dedicated emergency manager to function on those responsibilities internally and not have to double up the duties with PD. Even there's obviously a close tie to that and a fire on both sides of that, but again, it takes. I know that's
Just
because
say, now that we control the other half of that
yes.
money.
We need somebody to coordinate those efforts.
We can do
obviously,
that.
yeah.
Well, and again, I know this because basically we do the exact same thing in the jurisdiction I work for, where we take on those duties, because that's the likely scenario there. But again, as communities continue to grow, that need increases obviously with certain emergency preparedness and all of those other facets that go in there, and having a dedicated person as this community continues to grow, I think will be something we need to keep an eye on moving forward. We're not there yet,
We have a
but it definitely
part-time-
takes away from them.
We have a part-time now, we're one of the larger cities that has a part-time, and I don't know about your jurisdiction if they have a part-timer. But it is a big system to
It's a
run.
big system.
It's a massive system to run.
Impact fees.
Yep.
For safety show.
We're doing well.
they're just in public safety, and
second page and then way down.
They're in the
It's not,
first.
they're not in the HCC.
No.
They're collected by the city.
Got it, understood. Yeah, I'll find them. I know where they
Now,
are.
for public safety impact fees, just,
Okay.
cause this was a question last year too, okay? All of our impact fees, I have in separate funds, except public safety. And the reason for that is, public safety funds can be used for one thing, a building. That's all, okay? So if I had them in a separate fund, I would have one line for the revenue coming in and one line for a building someday in the future, okay? All of my other impact fees, we collect the impact fees and they can be used on a myriad of projects, so we keep track of them separately. But I don't find a reason to do that in public safety, so it's in the public safety fund.
And you've accounted for it properly with.
Yep.
That's in that 9.1 million. It's included in that.
Yeah, it's, we are projecting 250,000 in impact fees this year, or 225 this year and 250 next year.
So I just wanna go back and clarify on the fire piece. So on that page that you pointed out,
Right.
cause I know Sharon and I have been comparing notes this last couple of weeks after last council meeting, trying to make sure that you understand. So the 3.326 that it shows as an increase over the 2 million last year and over the 1.7, I guess that's the revised last year and the
Right.
1.7, the original. 2.4 of that is for fire,
Right.
which will get repaid in November. So we will see that temporary decrease in the fund balance, right, to the 1.68 and 6.4%.
And
But
just so
then when we
you
get
know-
that fire money, it goes
Right.
back in.
Just so you know, the money coming back from fire is not budgeted yet. And the reason it's not, we can't budget that money till we set our tax rate in August.
Right.
Okay, so we show it going out right now, but we all know it's coming back. So when we do our budget, when we do our tax rate for the fire in August, we will then do a budget amendment that will bring that all
2.4
back in.
million back,
That revenue back.
Yeah, I'm projecting that the fire revenue this year will be about $7 million. So we're putting out 2.4 up front, we're gonna bring back in 7 million later in the year.
So then that fund balance will be up to about 4 million.
Yeah. Yep, 4.6 or 7.
Which will still be a bit less than what we're used to, right?
Yeah.
As far as percentage.
Well, the percentage is going down every year because the
Our
revenue
budget's
is going
going
up.
Right.
Okay, we're keeping our balance consistent, but every year that the revenue goes up, the percentage goes down.
I guess the balance is still lower though too, right? Cause we were at 5.5 and then we'd only be at like 4. So, okay, so I was just trying to add those up. I knew I was missing I had to be missing something somewhere. Cause I had a heart attack when
And so, yeah, part of that is this fire is going to take us down for a few months.
Okay.
But by November, that 7 million will come back in and then bring that back to
that
what
transfer
we expect.
capital projects is what it's listed as.
Oh,
Fire.
okay.
Cause we transfer all the excess to capital projects, so, and that's what we were trying to show in that earlier thing is we typically send about 1.8 million to capital projects. This year, we're looking at 3.3.
And then the other thing from that original meeting was, like you said, priorities, right? Well, can't do everything and I think they've tried to do everything before. And as long as that more new money's coming in, you can kind of make things work. But looking ahead, which is one of the reasons that Olympia Hills is being discussed, is if we're within our current boundaries and we don't get Olympia Hills to come into our boundaries, then we're looking at declining building permits. That one-time money is going away right
Right.
now.
Yep.
And so we can't keep spending that capital project money on things if that continues to be the case.
Well, at our current rate, our building permits are declining at a slower rate than our sales tax is increasing. So we can continue at the level we're doing now, but you're not gonna get out and do a whole lot of capital projects. But we can continue to operate very well with what we've got,
It's
you know?
even still with those even if building permits were up, we're still only talking $4 or $5 million
Yeah.
that's being allocated to capital projects when we're talking about, you know, tens of millions of dollars of projects, you know, or
Right.
what do they say, just 3.3 million just for road surfacing, I mean.
Right, which is why it's even more concerning to me, right, is that, right, well, like, and it comes down to those choices of, like, the presentation we had last time of how do we sort through the priorities and where does it go? I mean, it existed in our meeting, there
Yeah.
seemed to be some frustration in the past of competing interests and what really are the priorities,
Yeah.
right?
That's,
So at least for me, I wanted to at least bring that up in here. Like, we should be setting those priorities pretty clearly. And that's kind of was my comment earlier about a lot of the new things are fun and some of them are needed, but at some point we have to take care of the old stuff too. We're no longer a brand new city. We've got roads that are beyond their life, right, that just simply have to be rebuilt. That are gonna cost millions of dollars and there's not a whole much longer we can put some of those things off.
well, the easy answer for, you know, if we wanna do more in Slurry Seal is we can move from capital projects, or we can go back and revisit the budget and say, is there any other thing we can do? But I think you can look at this budget and it's pretty lean. You know, I gave you two comparisons in percentages. One is based on what happened last year and what we expect to come this next year. And I think you can see that, you know, we're down significantly in a lot of areas. You know, what we're projecting expense wise.
And why do you suppose that is? And sorry, I've been at a different meeting, but I guess, in my opinion, a government budget should always be very lean. We're operating off taxpayer money, and so why isn't it always very lean?
I guess that goes to whatever your definition of lean is. You know, right now, we're saying we don't have enough money for road maintenance. But we've cut some, you know, we've got 970,000 in there, but, you know, are we still lean if I put another $500,000 on road maintenance?
Well, I guess
We're still lean.
lean to me is essential services versus niceties and entertainment.
Okay,
Well, that's the one, that's kind of hard for this body, right? We talk about it this time of year and that's it, and we do put a lot of trust in
Right.
you guys, that's your job. This is our extra time.
And I kinda took it as, especially to the lean comment, as, you know, last year's budget was, like, I grew up on a farm, okay, so bear with me, is, you know, 90% lean. We moved to 92% lean this year by trimming a little bit more out of that, but I think, that staff really always understands that the expectation is, and to your point, is that the essential services, those are the things that we're really focused on, and yes, we have a park here that we need to budget for, and those types of things, which are dependent on your definition. So to some people, it's a nicety, and to others that live in that particular area where that park's gonna serve, it's an essential thing like that. But that being said, I think, again, what I saw reviewing the budget was really, I think, as Alan described it, is there was opportunity for more new allocations to be added this year based on the growth that we've seen over the past year, and those weren't in there in some of those departments. Which honestly, I anticipated, because I know that we were extra cautious last year too, because we were in the middle of the pandemic.
Right.
Okay. There were 10 people approved to last year's budget, but we never filled.
Right.
And then they were not added to this one either. You know, so, I think that's what you've seen, because, you know, I talked to our managers about the same thing I talked to you guys about, is that if we wanna do some of these other things, we need to see what we can do on our operations side. We can't continue to grow operations at the same level as our revenue and expect to do the other things that we're talking about.
Yeah, great point.
So,
What is civic rec and miscellaneous revenue?
that is the, software that we use to manage all of our recreation stuff, like the ice ribbon and, all of our recreation programs. And eventually, our people move that into the appropriate calendar, but it automatically goes into one spot and then we have to manage.
So-
That's software.
It's software, but that's actually the revenue we receive from the ice ribbon and, plays
Okay.
and,
Okay, so
Whatever.
that's
Thank you.
the revenue that we're
That's the
receiving
revenue.
from
Thank
those
you.
things.
and like I say, it will be moved to all of the appropriate line items, but the way the software works, it dumps it in one spot and then we have to deal with it manually.
So when I'm looking at the expenditures and I see the ice ribbon costing us a lot of money, is it being offset by this 180 on the civic gret? And
Yes.
it's just not being reflected here?
Well, you never,
It just comes back in as revenue to the
the
general fund, right?
revenue that comes in general and you have expense that goes out in general. Now, we can look at what ice ribbon revenue is specifically, but it's not gonna show in the financial statement or the budget that way.
What about enterprise fund administration? That's like in finance, it's in information technology, it's in customer service.
It's
What
in
is
all
that?
of them. This is, it's new it's been there a year, this is the second year, but we charge the city for water. On the other hand, we charge the enterprise fund for doing their
Okay.
everything.
This
We
is the-
charge them for finance, we charge them for IT, for HR, for building space, all of those things. So now, up until 2 years ago, this was shown as a revenue item. 2 years ago, the state auditor determined it should be a negative expense. So for the last 2 years, it's showing up as a negative expense. But we do have a calculation we go through each month that goes through all of the people that are involved and all the expenses that are involved in managing the enterprise fund. And we created an entry to charge them for it.
Okay, cause that makes sense, cause I was like, it doesn't make sense to me how it's customer service has such a huge allocation
Yeah.
versus the next one, but that's why, it's because they interact more with the people
Well,
calling in.
virtually everything they do is taking a water bill and park fee.
Okay. That makes sense.
That's what they do. Set up water funds, It's virtually all support of the enterprise fund.
Ask another, most minor and
Yeah,
medium questions
go
that I
ahead.
probably have asked before. So just as I'm trying to make comparisons across and not ask dumb questions, but there's a way to do that.
Go ahead.
So,
I'm making a habit of asking them.
and I am looking at the summaries, honestly, for that very reason, because looking through each department's budget, I know that that's the case, right? If you parceled out the cost of this employee across 4 different budgets and that sort of thing. So, at least I think most of us are gonna look at the summaries. And the big numbers are what I look at first, so the fiscal year 2021 budget of 24.4 million, the revised, which should be pretty certain at this point, right, with less than 2 months left, is 21.8, so significantly less than revenue than what we thought would come in. And we managed that well, but then projecting 26 for next year, I'm just concerned about making that transfer to capital projects and having such a small balance, and I know part of that's timing.
Well, for one thing, that transfer to capital projects does not happen unless the other stuff happens. Unless we have that excess, it doesn't happen. We have not made the transfer to capital projects this year yet. It will happen probably the third week of June, when I know what that number is. I don't know if you remember or not, but I had a finding on the audit last year because I made the transfer 2 weeks early and I made too much, okay? So it'll be right at the end. We
If you
don't,
didn't notice, Alan's still just a little bit upset about it.
we don't like findings,
You were right, you were just too right.
but you have to make an estimate when you're coming up there because I don't have all of that information until the 3rd or 4th week of July. But I'm gonna make that call in June. Well, last year I missed by a little bit. So we have to make sure we have that money before it goes capital projects. There's nothing going on in capital projects with this money till it actually exists, so.
Right. Which is kind of the next part of my question, and I just probably didn't look hard enough, it's probably in here, or maybe we don't have it in this one. But I wanna say in years past, and it might have been a few years past, was we had a summary of what the increases were in each department, so that's kind of what I'm thinking of, looking, okay, so if we need to think about the end game potentially, right? With our buildable area, et cetera. That's only a few years from now. And the things we just talked about, it is timing when those are transferred in and out, but we have the ongoing operating costs. So those things are built into this budget as well as increases. Is there somewhere that just gives a summary what the increases are for each one?
Well, I've got
I mean,
the
we're
perc-
anticipating more revenue.
Yeah, I've got the percentages of increases, I don't have the dollars in here of the increases, but,
Cause there's the percent change.
yeah, percent change, and that's the change. I've got one of those columns is the change of the original 22 over the 21 original budget, and the other one is the 2022 change over the 2021 budget, so that, because I thought that made sense to show both of them this year. I normally don't, I gotta just show from the revised to the new budget, but I thought, but I can give you the dollar amounts of that, easy enough to do.
Well, the reason I ask that is that previous conversations we've had with the budget is looking at particular things and trying, for us, it's a matter of balancing, answering the question, what are essential services, right? So to me, that might be different than Steve or Glenn or whatever, and to me, essential services is water, roads, right? The basic stuff that allows people to work and live. And then the play part is essential, and we need community involvement and things, but to me, those are after the living and working every day needs are taken care of. So conversations we've had in the past, and I don't know if we had this conversation last year with this council, but looking at some of those extra things, while they're fun and there's a community involvement part of it, which absolutely is needs to be there, right? There's really no point in having our city if people don't feel connected to it, right? But at what point are we paying for too many of those things and taking money away from the live and work everyday things? So the things that have gotten picked on before, I'm not suggesting that we pick on those now, but things like the Arts Council, we talked at length for several years about spinning them off to a nonprofit and setting a fixed amount. This is what the city can provide towards that for the community involvement piece. But the cost of that continues to go up, and there's always an ask for more and more, and it's hard to have that conversation here. So whether it's, in that fund, several things, all of the different events that we do, we have so many things every single month, to get the community involved, how much are we spending on those things versus the increased need for road maintenance, et cetera. Does that make sense? I just wanna raise those issues. It'd be good to be able to quantify that somehow. I know it sends steam coming out Alan's ears if I'm in his chair, because it's so hard to keep track of this already. But from our layman's point of view, is the rodeo paying for itself?
Yeah, cause
Is how much is the Art Council bringing in versus how much are we subsidizing it? Are there some of those things that we can compare apples and
Okay,
apples to?
well, whether the rate of rodeos,
Just examples,
well, let me just answer that as the example. Okay, first of all, the rodeo revenue by state law has to be separate, okay, it is. It cannot offset the expense. So, to answer that question, I've gotta go through and figure out the revenues that go with that.
So I just
And
said,
the
I know it'll send steam coming out your ears,
Well,
because it's
no,
not how you
it-
account for it.
No, and I can't. I actually can show you about 3 years ago, I challenged the state auditor on whether or not I could do this differently so that I could show you that.
Yeah.
And he came back and said no. But, if we wanna see what specific things are making money, I can go through the revenues and match them with the expenditures. But I can't put them in my funds that way,
So maybe we need to identify some of those specific things that we wanna know, to have that separately.
Yeah,
We can do that.
That would be helpful, cause when I look through this and I go, okay, the rodeo cost us almost $100,000, and it's like, how could it cost us that much money when people buy tickets and we have sponsors and all kinds of stuff, so it's like,
Yeah.
that doesn't make sense, and it should be a net zero. I don't care if it makes money, it's a great community event,
Yeah,
but we should be a net zero.
okay, but when you look at the item for rodeo, you're looking at the expenses.
That is
Expenses,
what
yeah,
the goal that we've
exactly.
said
Not
we have
looking
for
at the
those
revenue.
things.
I'm
Yeah.
just gonna just make a statement of kind of disagreement with that premise. If every activity or thing that we do in the community is designed to be revenue neutral, that's not what the taxpayers are asking us to do.
Well, but I think that they're asking us to take care of roads, water, infrastructure before we have niceties. That's the only.
And
I disagree. I don't think it's an either or. I think they want roads and infrastructure and they want
Well, that's why I just
parks
said
and
it,
trails.
it's gonna be
and-
different for all of us, right?
No, I'm not suggesting that it's a higher priority per se. I'm just saying part of what our responsibility is to make sure that all of those things are getting provided for in an appropriate way. And there's definitely shifts and times and competing interests and our job is to sort through that. But to suggest we wouldn't fund a rodeo because it lost $10,000, I think, I don't know that's the right.
Well,
I know.
Course of
I
action.
don't wanna speak for Sherry, but where I'm going with that is that there's some of those things that I'd like to know how close we are. What, how much are we subsidizing it, and should we be doing more if it costs more, right? Some years it's gonna be this much more for whatever reasons, like that is a decision that we're essentially making if I'm putting extra money towards that. And like I said, community pride and involvement is important, we need to put some money towards those things. But it's hard to look at this and quantify what we're doing there versus roads.
Right, and I guess I'll say it like this. In my home, we have wants and we have needs, okay? Our residents want a swimming pool really badly. I've said that, I've heard that in every little interview I have with anybody. Or pickleball courts, right? Okay, those are wants, and they're awesome, and they're great for the community. But in my household budget, we have to address our needs before we can address our wants. And I just think that we have to really be careful that we don't let some of our wants take the money away from the needs, and we say, sorry, your road is gonna have to look like that for a while because we want this, do you know what I'm saying? In my mind, and the way I operate on it is I have to address the need first, because it's a safety concern. Infrastructure, traffic, those kind of things are
I
safety.
completely agree,
So
100%.
I'm not suggesting that we do away with all this stuff at all. I agree with the needs of that too. But I just have to feel like we just have to really make sure that we're looking at that going, but we can all make a list of things we really want in our community, but at the end of the day, we have to figure out how to pay for them.
Last year, the rodeo got canceled because of COVID.
And I was sad about that.
And we ended up doing bull riding because this council said, those cowboys gotta make money too,
Absolutely.
okay?
Be
So
at the top of
it
the list.
became a priority because those cowboys had to make money. Now, we spent the money on bull riding,
Not just because
With-
the Cowboys need to make
well,
money, but people
this-
need something to do too, and some
Right.
of us aren't scared of the
well,
boogeyman.
in this meeting, it was said that we were doing it because cowboys needed to make those guys were gonna lose the revenue if they couldn't come to our bull riding, okay? So we're $40-something thousand into a bull riding that, and now the health department says you can only have 750 people come and buy tickets. It's never gonna make money, okay? So,
But what I'm saying is I was, for something like that, and I just wrote down that we need, cause it's not something that is identifiable in the budget, right?
Right.
These are extra things that we would be asking you to show us.
and I could
We
come
need
up
to
with
tell you
any
what
of them
those
you
are.
want.
And I can tell you, Steve, I was very outspoken about the bull riding last year because there was a lot of people out of work, a lot of people hurting for income. They don't get unemployment, and so we had scheduled that, and I was supportive of that. So I guess that's my point is saying that, because in my mind, at some point, it became a need. I felt like it was a need for our residents to have something to look forward to, an
Sure.
event or something like that.
And I would
So-
just articulate it this way. There are a diverse definition in our community of what needs are.
Sure,
I think that we saw during COVID parks, open spaces, trails, recreational opportunities, community events were needs when, mental health is such an issue, when lockdowns are happening, right? I think they were probably more needed than a new water line in some places, right? But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be building water lines. And to suggest we need road improvement and new streets and things, I'm agreeing with that. But that also doesn't mean that we don't have community events. There has to be a balance in there, right?
I agree.
And I agree that our job should be reviewing it and look for opportunities to enhance or improve or consolidate or cut or curb or through any of it and make our recommendations for that. But I guess I'm uncomfortable being a person at least strongly associated with the arts in my background. I know for the people who were involved in the harmonic show that was here and the people that attended, I don't know that was so much as a luxury as an opportunity for members of our community to express themselves and be engaged in something which is their way of forming community, communicating, expressing, recreating,
I don't think she's
some of
suggesting
those
otherwise.
people don't walk on trails, you know what I mean?
No, for sure.
So that's what I'm suggesting is that there's a wide variety of what people might define as needs.
Sure.
And so I just am uncomfortable classifying all recreational activities as wants.
Sure.
Because I think some of them, they're very much needed in our community.
Sure, and I don't disagree, but I guess to me, when I think of needs, it's essential services. Because I would think a water line is more essential than a rodeo, because water is essential to life. So there are essential services. I think the police, I think that's an essential service.
Sure.
And we can't, if we're gonna have to say a bull riding versus police, sorry, the police have to trump that, because that's an essential service. But there is a plethora of things that we can subsidize, okay? There are people who love arts, and there are people who don't.
Right.
So what do you do for the people who don't, that come and say, well, I want you to subsidize this because we have an element in your community, and I want you to subsidize this. You just have to be very careful. If you're gonna subsidize something, you open the door to have everybody say, you have to subsidize this because this is my special interest. This is what brings joy to me. Well, you have to subsidize this. So that's all I'm saying, is that we
But I
have to be
think that's
careful
what
of that.
everybody in our community is lobbying for, right?
Absolutely.
Because there's limited funds and everybody's committing.
Absolutely,
But I mean, the good thing about the way this budget works is that the key elements, water has its own revenue source. Public safety has its own revenue source. Fire has its own revenue source. And those things are paying for themselves regardless of any of these other decisions we make.
Right.
The decisions that we might make, adjustments to arts and recreation, things that we might do with, employees that we hire, things we might do buying certain trucks or not buying certain trucks, right? All of those things are things that we can do that impact our, general fund budget. And that's unfortunately where most of our extra money is going to pay for capital projects, right? We don't have another source of funds. So I understand we're trying to maximize that as much, and that was one of the things I asked about before is, should we transfer 2 million or 2.5 million or 3.5 million, or should we look to make it 5 million, and which projects could we advance, right? So, I'm completely comfortable and supportive of trying to adjust the priorities. I guess I'm just saying I'm uncomfortable eliminating or describing all of arts and recreation and parks and everything as not necessary, because they are
Yeah,
necessary.
no, I don't disagree with you, but when I say, is it net neutral, is it gonna cost us, is it not? Yes, it's gonna cost us, okay, does the benefit outweigh the cost? But I have to understand exactly what that is.
Is there specific, I guess, events that you want Alan to get that information for?
Well, so that's what I started writing down, right, is so that those are things, if there's specific things that we wanna look at, then we need to ask them to do that. Where I was thinking with this, where I was going with my line of questioning was, okay, and I'm gonna pick on the Arts Council, cause that was the hot topic when I first came in, right? Like those of you that were here, that was the hot thing, was the Arts Council is eating up too much money and you need to do something else with them. So if we look at their budget last year to this year, as well as maybe some of these others that have revenue sources. I wanna see what we're how much are we subsidizing and what's the increase, if there's an increase, how much over last year? And when I look at those things that maybe are extra, I'm not gonna say do away with them. If we've supported the Arts Council with $100,000 a year for the last 15 years, I don't really see how we could yank the rug out from under them, right? Unless we are in a dire situation, right? But if they're asking for a $10,000 increase year after year after year after year, and over the last 5 years, that 50,000 plus the increase from 4 or 5 other things could have paid for one of those red roads up there, then that's what I want to be able to look at. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I
think that's a fair analysis too.
Yeah, I agree, but there's also, I think, as the city grows and all of our other needs increase, so does the needs of the Arts Council to be
I
able
just
to
said I want
provide
to be
those.
able to look at
Yeah.
Well,
that and
yeah,
make those comparisons. I didn't say I want to look for money to take away from any program.
Right.
if you wanna look at things that you want me to,
Yeah, if you have specifics, get them
but
out.
just out of curiosity, I pulled up Arts Council while we're talking about it. And in this current budget, we're budgeting $137,000 for our company. We're also budgeting $117,000 of revenue from their activities.
So about 20
Yeah,
difference.
so,
Of
Which
all
if
of
I
their
remember is better
activities.
than it has
right.
been in the
And I
past.
can tell you this, that when you're looking at the general fund, there's not very many areas that actually cover the cost. I would say that 97% of them do not cover the cost. That's it, you know.
Yeah, and they wouldn't. That's why I put
They
it in
don't.
terms of if we're subsidizing,
city
we
government.
can look at that and see what the increases are.
No.
So I'm gonna take it the next step where maybe some staff members might cringe a little bit.
Yeah.
As I do wanna see the dollar amount increase in, at that department level for the same reason. Okay, well, we're adding another person to operations. What does that mean versus redoing that road? And I'm not saying I don't want, we need people to help with operations and keeping track, keeping everything up to speed, but it's that same type of analysis that we're kind of missing, cause really with this, I can look at it and say, yep, the audit says we're recording everything properly, but that doesn't mean we're making wise decisions, right? We're gonna sign off on the budget
Yeah,
that says all these departments can spend all this money, but I at the end of the day, what is,
Let me try and articulate what I think you're saying here.
please do.
Because I think I'm
Good job of
understanding.
it.
I think what happens is that as, I think Alan talked about this, as revenue grows, expenses have grown in proportion.
Yes, let me
Kinda
put it in
generally they
personal
should,
finance terms.
and
What I tell
possibly-
my clients is that there's an old saying in personal finance that expenses will rise to meet
Yeah.
available income.
Spend what you make.
And once you're used to that lifestyle, you're never gonna go down again, right? And so that's exactly what I'm kind of getting at and looking at here is, well, as revenue goes up, at some point, we're gonna hit that crest and we're either at it or close to it. And we might actually see a decrease, so what room is there for that increase versus maintaining
Right, there-
what we
and I think that's a complete, I guess that's what I'm trying to articulate is I think that's reasonable. You look at, have we increased budgets just proportionately? Or have we increased them according to appropriate need and allocation, right? And I think that's where you're trying to get to is an analysis of which ones have just grown by happenstance and which ones were deliberate. And I think you wanna be more deliberate about it.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying about needs versus wants. It's like, did we increase them because we really needed to, or did we increase them because we wanted to, and we have the money, so this makes sense, let's just do it.
A lot of that's driven by the market though too, and since you bring up the rodeo, I sit on the rodeo committee, and one of the biggest expenses we have every year as part of that 100,000 is the stock contractor. And what we have to pay for them to bring the rodeo here, right? And our events department this year did a great job of pushing back on the market increase that the stock contractor wanted to levy on us, but those things are things that are outside our control, so at some point you have to decide, cause we can't add any more. Well, you could, if you wanna add another capital project, you can add more seats to the grandstand.
Well, it's-
I'm
I'm
not
gonna give
sure
you a
Wendy would be
real-
very happy about that.
I'm gonna give you a real
You have
for
the
instance
rights.
when it comes to
Ticket
department
sales.
stuff and services. So if I were to look at what it costs for park maintenance, right? So if we put in new parks, what does that mean for the rise in the cost of park maintenance versus road maintenance? That's a real comparison that I wanna be able to make. If our park maintenance budget is increasing at a higher rate than the roads, then that might be an issue or whatnot. Does that make sense? But-
reasonable comparison.
But I'm also saying that that's on us to tell Alan what those things are, because that's not what he's supposed to do with this. And as we look through this, there's no way for me to tell that, right?
But you know, just take for instance though, the facilities area that you mentioned a minute ago. Now, I haven't put the calculation in to show what this is, but last year you budgeted for the facilities area $896,000. They actually only did $799,000. There were some cutbacks last year, we didn't have the building open, it wasn't, anyhow, we are now looking at $100,000 less this year than what we budgeted in that department. Now with adding the new person, we are budgeting $844,000, so it's about $60,000 less than what you budgeted last year, and we're adding a person.
Yeah.
You know, and I think you'll see that all the way through, and I can put those calculations for you. But
So what I would just ask, I guess then for all of us, a lot of very good discussion on things, but is it specific to this year's tentative budget? Are there specific things that we want Alan to drill into, you know, to give us that information back that may affect, again, the ultimate approval of the budget moving forward?
I do have one question, area economic development. I think I have it, but it was, we'd have been averaging around $300,000 a year, and then the last year's budget went up over 600,000, and now it's coming back down to 300,000. What was that spike related to?
we budgeted for a $300,000 economic development manager.
Got it. That's what it was for. Okay, thank you. That explains, I was just trying to figure out,
Yep.
I mean, I hate to see cutbacks in economic development, but, you know.
Your question is the right one to segue, I think, right? If we're ready to do that. For me, the answer to that is, I look at this year as kind of a reset year. We've got a new city manager hopefully coming on in short order. And what I'm looking for with having the answers to some of my questions today, as I go back and look through some of those things, and that's what I really wanna look at, is the increase, right? So if the budget this year is just shy of 22, we're expecting 26, but yet our fund balance still goes down, even accounting for the fire, like where are those increases, and does it make sense to really do those, or is there a way to put those further off? So I'd really like to give the new city manager a chance to come in and basically start looking at the budget from here on out. This last year, I call it kind of a reset year from COVID, right? I mean, so many of these things didn't happen, and it almost is kind of a reset. And everybody did a great job with the budget last year, being conservative and making sure that we would be there. That's what I would say we do again this year, and then looking forward is I wanna give our new guy a chance to come in and make that strategic plan and talk, look at some of these things that we're talking about. I'm not gonna expect Alan in the next, 30 days or less to go in and pick apart all this stuff. If I throw, 20 categories at him and say, hey, I wanna compare these.
I could have them in a day or two.
I know, you're awesome, but that, I don't know that I'm gonna have that for him, but I would like to be as conservative as we can and at least make that one comparison of, okay, where are the increases really going in dollars?
You know, I can tell, I went through, so in my world financial analysis, you look for deltas that show
Yeah, that's-
performance changes and operations, right? And so I'm looking at some of these deltas, and I went through and I went through the line items of the things that I thought, okay, maybe that's a little, just went the ones that had big deltas and kind of, and I went through, and I added up, it was like $84,000. Like, I mean, you could cut all those and it would be
That's why-
$84,000.
That's why I wanna see the dollar amounts
I mean,
too,
that was
'cause
the budget, it's
percentage
like
change,
this-
there's some
right.
of them in there that are 100%
Right,
changed.
but it's
because
$2,000, right?
It was $100 that was there
Yeah,
this year
yeah.
that wasn't there last
Right,
year.
right, so that's what I did, and I was like, even went through all the ones that had this massive deltas, it was seriously like
So I guess that's the one thing I would ask
$84,000,
is
okay,
that-
it was almost nothing,
Is
right?
the dollar amounts
Okay,
added
I can do
onto
that.
that, and if you can, just the summary of here's the increases.
Do you wanna, I guess for simplicity's sake, based on Steve's comments there, do you wanna set, is there a threshold? Do you just wanna see all those dollar amount changes, or is there a threshold you wanna set to say anything over X amount, or
It's
the ones
probably
we
the
want?
difference of pushing a button to
Yeah,
include the
it's no
cells,
big
right?
deal to
Okay.
put-
Alright, anyone else have anything then for Alan in terms of additional information as we finish walking through the budget process for
I don't
next
want
year?
Alan's job.
No, I think
just in case
that will be,
ever
that will be
occurs.
very helpful, and I'll just clarify that I do like the rodeo. But I just want to understand what things cost us versus what we, the benefit versus the cost, I think
Right.
is our job to understand.
I think the fact that you were able to give us the amounts of what's budgeted and what's anticipated in revenue on the other side told us that there was, well, I guess that was in the Herman
Arts
Arts, a little
Council.
bit different, but there's a couple of things, if there's specifics, we should
Yeah.
ask
I can go
Alan
through
specifically
Cause
for those.
there's more, there can be a benefit more than just a dollar benefit, there can be a community benefit, those
absolutely.
types of things, so I just need to understand that, so I understand what the offset
Yeah.
is.
Yeah, I think
No
that's,
problem.
I think that's a really interesting question, kind of in a bigger thing is, which areas are creating surpluses and which ones are being subsidized, right, across our budget? I think we'll find out, huge subsidies in key services, road building, major subsidizing from the general fund, right, capital projects, major
that's-
subsidization from the general fund.
Several
right?
things are only funded.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, so,
I don't think you'll find anything in our general fund except building permits, funding the building department, that actually pays for itself. I don't think anything else will actually cover the cost.
Alright,
Welcome to government.
let's move on to item 3.2 then, which is the future bonding discussion.
I just wanted to bring some considerations to you to think about. Okay, first of all, in the recent legislature, House Bill 244, they promised us $800,000 a year for 15 years. I've gone and I've had an analysis done of a bond. We could go out and bond for $10,500,000 using this $800,000 a year as payment. At the current rate, we would be looking, well, the proposal right now would be 1.7%. The last bond we did was at 1.4. I think they're being a little conservative here, but it's just an opportunity with this ongoing cash that the legislature has promised to give us, that we go out and do $10.5 million worth of roads.
and honestly, the big calculation for me here is 1.7 of interest cost versus what inflation for those expenses are gonna be. We're coming way ahead by bonding for it.
So
We're doing it now.
we had them just tell us that, what is it if we stay under $800,000? And essentially we're at 10.5 is what we could bond. And if we restricted the money coming from the state to make this payment, it's new money that we could then put into some roads. Okay? The second item was, we have a need, and I've been asked to look at what it would take to build Station 103. We've gotten a lot of different numbers on what the station's going to cost. When UFSA was planning on building 8 stations a year ago, they were claiming $3.5 million each for them. We're hearing from architects and from the firemen, or the fire chief, that we're probably looking more like $6 million. Okay,
Is that including land acquisition, or is that just the facility?
that's the facility
Okay.
on our land. Okay? Now, I would suggest if we're going to go out and bond for the Station 103, that we ought to bond for roughly $12 million and pay UFSA off.
Yeah.
We have currently a bond obligation with UFSA on Station 120, whatever, three,
23.
of $5,874,000. That would continue for about 15 more years. Now, I just kind of think that if we go out for a bond on our station, we go ahead and do the bond for the entire thing, got the tie completely with UFSA. Now, I have talked to Tony Hill over at UFSA. He tells me he is sure that the board wouldn't have an issue with this, but it is not something that is defined in our. So they would have to, as a board, agree to allow us to pay
Prepaid.
that off. Now,
Cause that doesn't pay off their bond, it
No,
pays off our
it pays
portion of
our
that
portion.
bond.
it just gets us off of it. I would imagine they would probably wanna do it because they're gonna get cash up front. You know, it's before interest, but they'd get some cash there that, otherwise they would get pieces out for 15 years.
I cannot think of a rational financial reason why they would not.
No, I can't.
I can think of a few other reasons, but not in
Okay.
that category.
Now, one of the things here is we're talking, this would free up Station 123, it would rebuild 103, but it also frees the land that is owned out on the west end that could be built on, it could be sold, whatever we wanna do with it, okay? Till the bond's paid off, that land is encumbered, okay? So, here again, now, this is a longer bond, so the interest that they're proposing in the analysis is a little higher, at 2.57%. But we would have an average, payment on this entire thing of about $780,000. We are currently paying UFSA $444,000 a year for our piece of their bond. So, this is another one where, the first one's funded with the state money, this one would be totally funded through the property taxes coming from the fire,
From the fire.
Right.
okay? Coming into this first year, we're estimating $6.5 to $7 million worth of money coming from the fire property tax. Our contract this year with UFA, once they get the increase, is going to be about 4.5%, or million, so we have some room there.
Surplus there.
Because, when we left UFSA, one of the things that we all knew we had to do was to rebuild 103. Okay, so, but I think if we choose to do this, if this is something you wanna do with that money, we need to go to UFSA, make a deal to get out of that, and let's just cut that loose.
Just the impact fee from the fire service area will just about cover that.
Right. It will, the fire impact fee is higher than the police impact fee, and it's generating most of what, and we do need to use it on either this or apparatuses. So it's something to,
But here's the next part is that we are going to need another station
Yep.
in the next, say, 5+ years.
that station's going to be a little harder because besides funding the station, you gotta fund $2.5 million a year to run it.
Right.
So, we need to look at, where we're gonna get to when we get to that 5 years. And
So part of the discussion that kind of we've been having off the cuff in between meetings is we'll look, especially if that impact fee basically pays for the two stations, right? It's gonna pay, that bond for 123, by the time we're all said and done, we'll have paid for that station at least 2 times over.
Yeah.
Right? But just the impact fee will pay for most of this to rebuild 103, pay off the other.
But the good news is,
And then we
think of
still
the
have
quality
the-
asset we'll be obtaining.
And then we still have almost roughly, at least at these numbers, 2 million in revenue from that to put towards that next station and
Yeah.
providing that
Yeah,
next
the
service.
surplus stuff.
So it actually allows us to get ahead of it.
That also doesn't account for us offloading that property, if that's what we
Right.
determined to do.
Which would be another
because
potential revenue source.
It has a reversionary clause on the deed that if it's not used for fire-related services, that reversionary clause kicks it back to UFSA if we use it for any other purpose, until our obligations are satisfied. So if we get out of those obligations, that reversionary clause expires, so we can dump that one.
And so,
Yeah, that's
you
great.
can do it, I think you remember back when we initially did this deal, we weren't sure we wanted to keep that land, and like you say, if we're out 15 years paying for it, maybe it's not gonna be worth what it is, you know, if we clear it up and can do something with it now. These first two that I've showed you, there are new money for, and I think that there's a pretty compelling reason for doing these first two bonds.
I agree with
You
you.
know,
I absolutely agree.
the first one could be done right away. This one, you know, we probably would have to get the UFSA board on, you know, in agreement. But once that's done, this one would be fairly easy to do.
Would we need to be all the way through the truth and taxation process and all of that before?
No, because even though we're gonna use the property taxes to pay for this, it's not what we're gonna use to secure the
Okay.
bonds.
Okay, makes sense.
So, you know,
So that happens first.
we can go out and do the bond, but, my proposal on this one, and if we do a public work, would be to do a municipal building authority. And use that as our security
As your
for the
security.
bond. Okay,
Let's just say.
which, you know, essentially,
This we-
this board is agreeing
Oh,
to be
yeah.
responsible for it, so.
Understood, yes.
Okay.
But, we would use the property taxes to make sure this is paid, but that would not be our security.
Gotcha.
Cause if we were to use property taxes to secure this, we would have to go out and have an election. Okay, I have weighed those,
Yeah, agreed.
so.
Okay.
You know, if we're a year down the road because we have to have an election to do a property tax security, we're likely to lose a lot of what we can gain right now. So my recommendation would be to do a municipal building authority. Now, we can't do a municipal building authority on the road piece, so we would probably have to supplement the security with some sales tax. Cause, you know, what the underwriters are telling me is that the bonding people are gonna want more security than the state saying
Than the
they would
state.
give us the money, okay? So,
Really?
so we would probably secure it with some sales tax, but
If it's the state and Chase, will they go for it?
yeah,
Okay.
Push it right through.
you know, it's just, but, you know,
It could work,
So-
work.
Still on the hook.
then I wanted to look at the public works, and I'm a little bit hesitant to talk too much about this because we're still tying down some of the costs. When we talked at the last meeting and the police said, okay, we shouldn't have our own building, we should just be in the public works. There's some things, yeah, but there's some things they need to do that were not in phase one. So they're gonna have to do, you know, the architects are working on,
The build out
This is
upstairs and
what
stuff
it's
they were
gonna
talking
be.
about, yeah.
okay? So my numbers are totally based on what it was before that change happened, okay?
Okay.
Now, so, okay, the building as it was originally proposed on phase one was $24 million. We still owe $3 million on the land, okay? So I would think if we go out and bond for the building, that we would want to also bond to pay off the land. First of all, you can't build with the bond money unless you do pay off the land, okay? Now, our payment currently for that property is $1,070,000 a year. We have 3 more years of that payment, just for reference. Okay, if we go on a 20-year bond, we would have a payment of between $1 million, 1,000,007, okay? With a true interest cost of 2.39. And you'll see the premiums change a little bit based on the length and so forth, and the interest changes a little bit. If we go 25 years, we're down about 1.5 million. The interest rate's fairly close at 2.39. If we go 30 years, we're down to roughly 1.4. Interest rate's a little higher at 3.1. So we have somewhat. These are some things we could look at for doing the public works, public safety facility. Now, like I say, the numbers are not finalized on what it's gonna cost, what we've gotta do. I'm more really trying to get the information out so that we can start the discussion, so.
So the takeaway from what you're suggesting is the first two seem pretty self-explanatory, right? I think that this one, it would result in an increase of 300, well, if we did the 30-year, an increase of about $300,000 a year in expenses out of the general fund to facilitate construction of a public works facility. Okay.
Over what we're paying
What we're paying right now for the land that we have,
Which- Right.
the land alone, right?
For the next
That's only
3
But
years.
the
three more
land is gonna be
years.
paid in
It's
3 years.
absolutely-
Except we're
30.
already, yeah, the payment's only 3 more years, so it would go up, but if we consider we're already paying that, and we
Right.
extend it, but it's just,
The part about that gives me pause, and we all know that we need this facility at some point, but in all reality, the priority was put on this building.
right,
For whatever reason, that none of us had anything to do with that, but we lived with that decision. Steve said, I think the fire one is self-explanatory, the road one is, the only thing that gives me a little heartburn is that it's sales tax compared to what are our current obligations there. Because quite frankly, if the investors don't wanna take the state's word for it, there is a good possibility that we hit a recession in the next 15 years and we don't get the money from the state, we're still on the hook to pay that, right, whether we get that money or not. I think we can work with that though. For this one, what does stick with me is concerns with the budget, looking forward this next 5 years, right? If we're in our boundaries, having that land paid for in 3 years sounds good to me, cause then we could sell that land if we had to and don't have that obligation.
Yep.
But committing ourselves to nearly, $1.5 to $2 million payment for 15 years when we're really looking at a 5-year window of potentially being in trouble if we don't make some changes. That's a little risky to me. I'm not gonna say that I'm completely against it, but I'd be much more comfortable having the new city manager come in and go through that strategic plan and have that kind of full discussion.
well, this isn't something I'm saying let's move forward on, this is the
Information.
beginning of the discussion.
I would ask, and I'll say this again because I said it many times the other night, but I asked specifically to come back with some alternatives, and the next thing I just see is bond options. Where are the alternatives? I asked about our own
Okay.
city hall, what's
I was asked to do bonds, I don't do the
No, I'm not,
alternative.
this is
So,
well,
I brought back what you asked me to bring.
I will say that this is not directed, I will say to everyone in this room, I was very clear and articulating that several times during that meeting, helped me understand, and I know it's not the optimal thing that we want to do, this is what everyone wants to do, I get that. But when we're just talking, we just bonded for that, now we have 2 more bonds right here, now we wanna bond for this, and this says 30 years up there, and we're only planning that for 3 years on the other, so it's like, do we have some other alternatives that fix the problem for a little while and carry us over until we just can't be carried over any further? And I understand the issue with bond markets. Who knows what it's gonna be like in 5 years? I don't know what it's gonna be like in 2 months. At our last meeting, we just talked about inflation and And the problem we're going into with that, there's some issues, I understand that portion of it, and cheap money and all those types of things, but I also understand at the end of the day, we're on the hook. Can we pay it? And so I would just truly like to know what those were, and I haven't seen anything back on that. Is someone working on that?
Well, yeah, we're working on it. So we were gonna wait to bring back the alternatives with the updates to the new public work to accommodate the HPD needs. Bring that back to you when that's done with the architect. So if you want alternatives before that, we can. We were just thinking, let's do it all in one meeting rather than stretch it out over several meetings.
I guess my point is, if I'm gonna look at a bond, I wanna look at the alternatives side by side to the bond. I don't wanna consider this without being able to look at something else and saying, here's some other options.
But I
You see
think
what I'm
Alan's saying this is just information.
Okay, sorry,
We're
I
not
don't mean to
being
be,
asked-
I don't mean to
and
be
it's a-
grumpy
and it's
sometimes.
okay.
We're
It's
not
a-
pressing the green or red
And it's a
button
best
on
guess
it.
on what the bond would look like
Dang you,
without
Alan, would you
having all the
quit forcing us
information.
into these
Sorry,
buttons?
Cody.
No, it's a valid point, but the exercise we're going through now is, so as the chief has said, we're moving away from this project. And so we're having to essentially combine the two programming phases for the police department needs and figure out, okay, what did we program over here that we still absolutely have to have in the next 5 to 10 years, and how do we fit that into the programming of Public Works? And so we're working with GSBS to piece those two together, and we wanted to bring that back to you in a total package to say, if we were to move forward with the Public Works facility, these would be the needs and the costs specific to PD, because that will change, that will affect the $27 million number. It'll likely go up, but it'll definitely affect it, and so we'll bring that back to you in a package along with, like Justin said, we've been feverishly working on alternatives.
So, and you also have a job to do besides that, is that what you're trying to
This
say?
is my job.
And work on a rodeo, you know.
Just make sure it's on the table. Just make sure that it's on the table and not like everybody here.
It
Like,
absolutely is, we're just, it's taken us a couple weeks to piece through the two programming from the two facilities and figure
Sure.
out where can we mesh together, where do we have things that we can maybe move off to a different area, where can we look at outside the box and some things and figure out what are our absolute essential needs to piece into that facility, cause what we have programmed at Public Works for the police department side is actually about 2/3 the size of what we had programmed in this building. And so we're cutting back on what we actually had programmed and trying to mesh those two together, so that's where we're at.
For
on
what it's
that.
worth, I think having those two discussions in the same meeting where we can compare them side by side is probably fruitful for us.
And it is for me, that's why, cause I was like, why are we just talking
It was
about
a
the
big
bond, how come we're
reset,
not talking about the other
and
stuff?
we've got a lot of work done on that. We'll get this back.
Well, I just wanna make sure you set
I'm just quicker
expectations.
than that.
Yeah.
Just expectations, cause the other night when this was discussed and everybody was in there, I was watching on the camera and whatnot. After the discussion, watched everybody go out and oh my gosh, did the council like that or not? Like I think it's fair to say we all want this for the city, we want this for the employees, and it's going to happen at some point. But I mean, right now with our current financial situation, for me, it's a bit of a stretch. So I totally get looking at it this way, that it's only this much more than what we're currently budgeting for that land. Well, I actually thought we were gonna have that land paid off before now, and there's kind of a, I don't wanna say this the wrong way or out of turn, but there is kind of a gorilla in the room with the auto mob that we're on the hook for. That if that doesn't work out, we're gonna have to sell this piece of land to get us out of jail there, right? So that like there are some real other considerations than do we wanna do this for everybody or not?
Yeah, I'll echo that 100%. I did do the field trip at Public Works facility. I get it. I have been over to the police department. I totally get it. It's not that I don't want it to happen, it's just have to figure out how to pay for it.
Well, and obviously the alternatives will have cost estimates attached to them, and
Yeah.
that's why Justin said, as we discussed it, we felt it was disingenuous to bring that to you without knowing how the changes to the PD programming are gonna affect that $27 million price.
Love it. That was the conversation I needed to hear. Thank
And
you.
I needed to preface mine by the fact that they told me their numbers are changing.
Right.
Yeah.
And you did.
All right.
We'll put them in columns.
Alright. Well, thanks, Ellen. I think, again, I think at least from the information provided tonight, I think there's a lot of interest on options 1 and 2 that were discussed tonight based on some of the things that we can accomplish and the needs that have been identified. So,
Agreed.
alright.
This was a
Just one
bigger
quick
discussion.
thing though, Zions did an analysis this afternoon that says that we could qualify for 37 million more in sales tax bond. So
Remember
there
what I
is-
said last meeting about what the lender's telling you you're qualified?
Yeah.
I know,
But can I make the
I
payment? That's what you
Sorry,
have to ask.
you know, but, you know,
Can't make all
there
the
is
payments.
room in our sales.
There's some room.
And you're absolutely right. What you qualify for, what you can pay for are two different things. But the other thing that came out of the discussion is that there may be a better interest rate for a larger combined bond than there is individual separate ones. And I don't know what that is at this point, but
It's a good consideration.
but in the bond market, the institutional buyers will look at a $35 million bond. They won't look at a $10 million bond, okay? Just, it's something that we will evaluate as we begin to look at what we wanna do.
What our
with
options
this.
are.
Can you have a bond backed by multiples?
Oh, yeah.
Right, like
Oh, yeah.
sales tax and fire and state $800,000
Yeah.
fund and all that stuff, I mean,
We have, well,
it's a creative repayment.
the tax incentive bond in the town center here is supported by, sales tax, by B&C road funds, by impact fees. Then you take the SAA bond in the town center, it's backed by a special assessment area, by impact fees, by, the CDA TIF money. So, yeah,
So, yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
we go with whatever, security we can get our best rates with. And sometimes, the one we just did for the water fund is supported by water fund, but we also have a guarantee insurance policy on it. That was part of what we did to get the rate we got, to get the investors we got. You know, we go with what
Gets
makes
the
the
best
most
rate.
sense at the time.
Okay, thank you. Well, that brings us to the end of the work meeting agenda, so the last thing we have on there is a notice for a closed session, which I understand we do have items to discuss. So I will accept a motion.
Motion to temporarily recess the city council meeting to convene in closed session for the purpose to discuss the character, professional competence, or physical or mental health of an individual, pending or reasonable imminent litigation, and the purchase, exchange, or lease of real property as provided by Utah Code annotated section 52-4-205.
Second,
All right, we have a motion and a second to go into closed. Sherry,
yes.
Steve,
Yes.
and I will vote yes as well, and we'll make sure we get Jared on the record when he comes back in.
You have your 75, your
3 or 4 is, yeah.
you're good.
Okay, all right. Thank you, everybody. We'll, keep those in and kick everyone else out. Doesn't need to be.